So good morning, good evening, community groups. Good to be with you again. I know that we have started the series on the church that Jesus died for in our morning services, but with holidays and so on, we'll pick it up now in our community discussions. And so we're talking about the church, and the reason is not just because it's good to kind of talk and get our minds around church, but the reality is that we're all part of the church. We all have stories of church. Some of us grew up in church, others of us got saved and joined a church. We've probably all got horror stories of church. But here's the thing, and here's really the heart behind why we wanted to do this series, is that we all, because of our different backgrounds and because of perhaps those churches that have been influential in our lives, as I mentioned, the churches we grew up in or got saved into, they all have influenced us in some way. But the reality is that churches are not perfect. There are a lot of churches that have added on a whole lot of traditions of men and so on. There are a whole lot of churches that can leave people quite broken and bruised or confused. And so for us at Lighthouse, it really is important for us to get back to what the Bible clearly teaches. And the question that we're asking ourselves is, what did Jesus have in mind when he said, I will build my church? Now, it's pure speculation on one level, but at another level, it's also about understanding from the New Testament and also from what Jesus himself taught, kind of the values of the church, what he expected of his church, what he wanted to see in his church. And so for us, this is really important. So we're kind of going back to the scriptures, back to what Jesus taught, back to how the New Testament unfolded and what the early church did by way of value and clear mission. And we're all part of that because that movement hasn't stopped. For 2,000 years, the Church of Jesus Christ has been advancing, and here we are in the 21st century. We're still preaching the word. We're still holding on to the truth. We're still sticking to what Jesus clearly taught us. So this week we're looking at leadership, the leadership of the church, because Jesus had something in mind when he saw this movement expanding over the centuries into the millennia. He had an image of how that church would be led. And so we talked about the fivefold ministry on Sunday morning, the ministry of the apostolic, the prophetic, the teaching gift, the ministry of the evangelist, the ministry of the pastor. And you can listen to that on Sunday morning. We're not going to go into all of that. But how the church is built up, how the church has moved on to maturity in Christ. And this is really, really important because we're never meant to be this kind of holy huddle, close the doors, singing our songs. It's a scary world out there. But rather, we're a church on mission. We're a church with purpose. And those fivefold gifts stir the church on, push the church forward. And we talked about that on Sunday morning. We also then need to be clear about what a spiritual leader looks like. Because a spiritual leader looks very different, as we talked on Sunday night, to a military leader or to a business leader. What does a spiritual leader really look like? So here's what I'd like us to do in our community this week is, of course, you can talk around Sunday services, what you got out of it, any questions or so on. But really two discussion points. And the first is, if leadership is influence, which to a large degree it is. In other words, the person with the title is not necessarily the most influential leader. There might be the person with the title, the leader, but the person who influences is also going to have a fair degree of influence and exert leadership within an organization or a movement and so on. So the first discussion point is this. When you read the Bible, which of those spiritual leaders, the characters of the Bible, have influenced your life? Maybe there was a time where you were able to relate to a Moses or a David or a Paul, based on the circumstances you were going through at the time in your own life, and you drew strength from their story. So maybe this is a great discussion point where we can just kind of go around the room, and whoever wants to share can just share of the influences, the spiritual influences that had an impact on their life at some moments, maybe even in your recent past or what you're going through at the moment. And so just in sharing how some of the characters of the Bible have influenced us is a blessing to everybody else that's listening. It's part of our story. And so maybe just briefly, because I know we could probably talk, it's one of those subjects we could really just kind of share in great detail, but to give everybody a chance. And if you get the time to maybe go into the second discussion question, and that would be just to talk about the spiritual characteristics. We touched on a few on Sunday night, but what stands out to you as key spiritual characteristics of a spiritual leader? And so And so maybe you just want to pick one per person just to go around and put another way. Maybe you want to say, well, what are some of the characteristics that you see in the leadership of Jesus? Because Jesus was the ultimate leader. He was the perfect leader. And so you could look at it this way and say, well, what of the leadership characteristics Jesus had really challenges you the most or really stands out? Quick story. I remember some years ago, many years ago actually, hearing kind of a video testimony of a leading businessman. His company had just been registered on the New York Stock Exchange. It was a company that he founded. He was the CEO. It had just grown phenomenally. And business leaders had come to look at this phenomenal growth, and he was making a whackload of money. He was one of the most influential leaders at the time. And anyway, he was being interviewed. He was also a born-again Christian, loved the Lord, served the Lord, and was a Christian interviewer, a Christian TV station. And I'll never forget his impact, because they asked him, and they said, what about the leadership of Jesus impacts you the most? And he said a surprising answer. He said his meekness. And the interviewer probed him to kind of ask, well, why would you say meekness? And I'll never forget his answer. And he said, because where I find myself today as this high-powered CEO, he said, with my position comes power, prestige, ego, status, money, everything you could think of, and the pinnacle of the American dream. But he said, with that comes all the temptations. And he said, what I found is that the meekness of Jesus' security in who he was. They didn't have to prove anything to anybody. He didn't have to do miracles to validate who he was. He was secure in himself. He said, it's the meekness of Jesus that influences me the most. And that just went like a wow moment for me. I was like, oh, that's just incredible. And so your testimony, your story of the spiritual leaders that have influenced you from the Bible, the kind of spiritual qualities that you see in Jesus or that you hold dear, have an impact on the group. And so that's why we're going to do that tonight. God bless you as you do that. We're really enjoying this series of the church that Jesus died for, because here at Lighthouse, we really want to be an authentic church, the kind of church that would make Jesus proud.